So it's important to recognize that I had nothing to do with any of the accolades of Eagle County Paramedics. I've only been there a year and a half. So yeah, it's an incredible place, and I'm very, very fortunate to be there and grateful to be there. But certainly, their reputation preceded me significantly. So thanks, Tim. That was an awesome introduction to this, because now we're going to drill a little deeper and talk about capital planning, which is an area that when I got into EMS administration, had kind of. And when Kim called me a couple months ago and said, would you be willing to talk to this group? I think what you said was to think about the things that you wish that you knew when you started doing EMS administration, right? So this is one of the things that I wish that I knew. I really didn't understand how this stuff worked. And this is the keystone, I think, to having a successful and sustainable organization. You have to build sort of representation of capital costs into your annual budgets, and you have to think about strategic budgeting and capital budgeting. So, oh good, this works. So here's our agenda. We only have an hour. So I called my finance professor, and I said, I was asked to talk about capital planning at a conference, and I have an hour, and he said, good luck. Because this is really a complex topic, and the reality of this is a majority of the things, if you Google capital planning, the majority of the stuff that you're going to find is not stuff that's applicable to us, right? We're not going to talk about net present values. We're not going to talk about figuring out how to generate revenue from capital investment. We're not building a factory and trying to decide whether building the factory is a good idea, right? We're talking specifically here about the sorts of items that we need to purchase and reinvest in and maintain to manage EMS services. So we have an hour. We're going to walk out of here with, hopefully, is your own capital plans. We'll see if that actually works. It's ambitious. But we're gonna. I want to hear a little bit from y'all, so I can kind of tailor this to the things that might be worth it for you. We're gonna do a 101 on capital, so it might be over, or it might be sort of understated for a lot of you. There are people in this room that know more about this than I do. You know who you are. If you want to leave now, the door is just over there. Every time you move, everything shakes, which is my favorite part of this whole thing. So we'll talk about some misconceptions. I think there's a lot of, when we start thinking about capital and capital planning, there's a lot of misconceptions. We're going to actually I have a worksheet. I actually have homework. You guys are at tables, which is awesome. So we're actually you're going to walk out of here with a capital plan. And if you work for an organization and you have that level of control, over your job, then you can actually make a capital plan for your organization. If not, you can do one for your home, or you can just make something up. We'll talk about a little bit about funding sources, and then we'll kind of bring it all together at the end and talk about why this stuff is really truly important for you when you're considering communicating with your constituents. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get a little bit of an understanding of the room. So who in this room works for a municipal organization that's tax funded? During private organizations? One. Well, I don't know how you do that, but congratulations. Who in this room currently has a functioning capital plan? Okay, there's some issues. There's a couple bits. Who is funding their capital plan to its full necessity? Ish. Okay. You just got a 50% raise. What are you talking about? So this is why this stuff is important, right? How do we continue to function as organizations if we can't make capital investment?
So assuming you'll get a grant is not planning.
I'm going to get to that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
I'm going to get to that. No, I don't necessarily think that assuming you're going to assuming anything in financial planning is a poor structure of decision making, right? We can absolutely rely on things like grants to offset costs, but we have to have a plan B, and that's your capital plan. So let's talk briefly. Let's talk about the context in which we talk about finances today. So this is the federal fund rate since 2000. What can you guys tell me about the federal fund rate since 2000? Oh, I should remind you, or I should let you know that I'm a professor at DU, and so most of the reason that I was able to do that is because I just make you answer questions, and I don't really say much. It's called the Socratic method. It's wonderful, and it allows me to not do anything, but also provide value. So here's a graph. Tell me what you think.
I believe it is shooting up like a rocket right now.
So we're here, right? This is the federal fund rate at about 5.5%. But what do you guys see over the course of the 25 years here?
It's been volatile.
It's volatile. It's a lot different than it used to be, right? So if you look at the 70s and 80s, you had like kind of a pretty high standard for the federal fund rate, and it would move up and move down, but it never got below 4.5, 5%. So what we see now, this is the new way that the Fed is managing money in the United States. And I'll give you this very brief tutorial. So essentially the Fed's job is to maintain maximum employment and control inflation. Those are the two things that they are here to do. And the way they do it is either raining money out of airplanes or vacuuming it up. All right. So when you see the Fed fund rate down here at 0%, that is the Fed raining money out of airplanes. And essentially what they're doing is giving us access to capital. They're giving us access to cash so the economy can continue to grow and develop, right? When we see this Fed fund rate start to rise up, these are times when the inflation pressure is starting to sort of move the Fed to dry some money up, or they're going to start vacuuming it. So what happened in 2000, 2001-ish? Why? What happened in 2007-ish? Housing bubble, right?
Problem.
What's that?
There was a little subprime.
A
problem.
slight, maybe some people made a lot of money and then a lot of people lost. What happened in 2020? COVID. So where are we right now?
In a lot of trouble.
What's about to happen?
A recession,
Why?
because of inflationary pressures.
So we just learned yesterday that the economy is freaking red hot, 4.9% GDP growth in the third quarter. We are at full employment and the inflation rate is 3.9%. Wow, right? That's amazing. If I told you 5 years ago that we'd be in this position, people would be ecstatic about that, right? But they wouldn't think we would have 7.5%, 8% mortgage rates. So what's going to happen? What is the money circumstance where the economy is doing really well? I mean, we're not going to get into a political discussion, but the metrics that we use to determine where the economy is actually doing really well. What else is happening in our world? Does this exist on an island?
No.
What else is happening? War. Right? Good.
So the other thing to consider is the value of your money that you have. So it costs more to borrow money, right?
Yeah.
But the money you have in the bank is also your interest rates are also going up with the rate of, the rate of the Fed.
So the dollar that you had in 2019 is not the same dollar that you have today, right? And hopefully, if you have money in the bank, you have it in some sort of interest bearing, even if it's just a money market account or something, so you can keep up with inflation. If you just have cash in the bank and you're not investing it, you are just losing money every month, right? 3.9% right now. But the geopolitical situation, it potentially is about to affect us. And if you look at this graph all the way down, I don't imagine that we're going to see higher than 6%. I mean, the economy was really cooking in 2000 when we reached that pinnacle. This is likely close to the top. So what does that mean from an investment standpoint? When we think about I need to borrow money, if I want to buy a house right now, should I buy the house now? What should I do?
Wait until either the cost of the product goes down or the cost of borrowing money goes
Right.
down.
So if you look at 2007, right here is when we saw the housing bubble pop. But it wasn't until the middle of 2009 that we really saw the interest rate bottom, and the bottom of the market was 2012. All right. So this stuff is all lagging. Anyway, I put this up here so we can sort of think about the availability of cash in the system right now, and how things might change moving forward. When we're thinking about long-term planning from a capital investment standpoint, we have to think about the trade winds that exist in the greater market, and we have to think about the geopolitical situation, because certainly every one of these things, I mean, here's geopolitical problem, here's an internal United States problem, here's a pandemic, I think is going to call geopolitical, but essentially a worldwide problem. So as those things crop up, this is where we see these big changes in the availability of cash. So let's start with a little 101. What are capital assets?
Yes.
Shout it out.
So your angle going from here, a lot of times your capital assets,
What's that?
going from upper and it'd be my upper, left corner down to my lower right.
So, oh, you're saying on the images?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even intend to do that, but wow, I did that, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
But I have to add that new little thing that we don't have, all fancy now behind the ambulance.
This?
Those are really expensive now.
that's a 35A, that's the only cot that ever existed, the only cot that I care about, that's the best cot that's ever been made.
In my case, CJ, the pizza would have to be more than $5,000 and last more than 5 years.
Which is CB, which is about for you guys.
I mean, you know, there's, I've had some ski area pizza that could meet that kind of so, sure, so what we're talking about here is this stripe that goes from the top left to the bottom right. We need a working definition for capital, I think I just heard one over here, what's your working definition for capital asset?
$5,000 and a service life of greater than 5 years.
$5,000 in a service life of greater than 5 years. I love that. That's a great way of sort of considering this. So these are, I would say, these are things, items, or structures or anything that we purchase that is going to provide value to our organization over time. Now, 5 years is your number, that's fine. If I was a manufacturer of automobiles, I'm probably thinking more like 10 or 15 or 30 years. I'm thinking about building a factory. How long is that factory going to last? These timeframes are important because as we think about timeframes, we're thinking about usable life, and usable life is going to play into calculations later. Oh, there is no math today, so you can rest assured there will not be any math at all. So then we think about this operating budget versus capital budget, and this is an important distinction. When you think about an operating budget, you think about the annual budget that you're creating with your stakeholders and community and your board of directors, and then putting forth next month probably for a vote. What does that consist of? How does that work? Revenue and expenses, right? So we're looking at the financial health of our organization, sure. What else do we have in that operating budget?
Coffee,
Coffee.
Okay.
Yeah, what would we call coffee?
capital pizza was up there.
No, this image is not all capital assets. This image is to help you see the difference between capital assets and non-capital assets. So I would love to think that my paramedic is a capital asset. They're gonna provide value over 5 years, but is that really a reality? When was the last time that you could reliably have an employee that lasted more than 5 years? So all the things on here that are disposable or non-durable, the pizza, the fuel, the paramedic, and these medical supplies. Thanks Google for all these images. Those are non-capital assets. So these are the sorts of things we're going to see in our operational budget, right? So when you think about your operational budget, this is the stuff that you need to do what?
For daily function.
Yeah, this is the things I need to provide value in this small segment of time when I'm considering making plans for that small segment of time, right? So these are the things I'm going to spend $35,000 next year on non-durable medical supplies, right? Operational budget. Now I'm going to go buy glide scopes. Operational budget, capital budget. Capital budget, right? Because the glide scopes, hopefully, unless they change the software the next year, are going to last me more than 5 years or whatever my metric is. So that's a capital budget purchase. So as I'm thinking about my capital budget, what is my capital budget communicating to the folks that are stakeholders in my organization?
Those are those high cost investments. I think because investments go into over time that you have to plan for and replace and fund.
Right. So
Somehow.
my capital budget allows me to truly telegraph the major costs that exist in us providing value over time, right? So it is a much more strategic look at my organization, right? And just like Tim was pointing out, there are expenses in managing our organizations that we don't probably, Tim does, but the rest of us don't eloquently communicate to our communities or to our board members or to our stakeholders, right? There's a lot of EMS organizations in the state that rely on the MTS grant maybe, or rely on other grants, or rely on communities or bond initiatives, or all these sorts of things that are sort of episodic to fund their capital needs, right? Is that a good strategy?
Yes.
Is that the only strategy?
Is that maybe the only
Well, I
advantage
mean,
you
the
have?
argument, I mean, I think where I was going with that is the argument for long-term kind of financing is the asset is gonna last a period of time. So there are people that are not in your community today that should be paying a portion of that asset cost over time. So financing, especially things that last 20 years or more with long-term financing is equitable to the community of today as well as to the community of the future.
That's a great point. So do you guys, does that resonate? I agree with that. I love the idea of planning for the future and having the future invested in the present. The challenge there is if I'm relying on something like the EMTS grant structure to buy an ambulance in 5 years, what am I not telling my community today?
You're gonna need.
Right. So I am not incorporating the real costs of managing my organization in my financial documents that I communicate to my board of directors and my constituents and my public today. I need to have this capital budget. I need to be able to illustrate this to the community on an annual basis. I need them to see the bottom line number that it costs for me to maintain the capital in my organization.
And I like that, because I think the other thing that we're seeing now that we've not historically thought about is, I don't think any of us anticipated the rate of capital increase cost. And so if you had an apparatus replacement budget, if you had a durable equipment replacement budget, and you got the EMTS grant, well, if you were depending solely on the EMTS grant, that's no longer gonna cover even 50% of the cost of an ambulance, or 50% of the cost of a cot, as Tim pointed out. But if you had that money, then that would offset. So I like what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you had a capital plan in 2010 and you're buying 35As, my favorite car, that costs like, I don't know, $1,500 or something. And then all of a sudden, when you actually got the capital replacement in 2015, the cot cost $30,000, right? Holy shit. Well, if I had a plan for that in 2010, at least I'm moving in a direction of being able to accomplish what happened in 2015. But if your plan is, we'll figure it out in 2014, guess what? You're way behind the eight ball. And you haven't, the point that I can't drive home enough here is you haven't eloquently and sufficiently notified your board and public and the stakeholders of the organizations of the true costs, right? Because we look at operational budgets and we say, okay, it's going to cost us $3.5 million to have ambulances roll down the street and people on them with the right equipment, fuel and insurance and all the things we need to pay for it. But there's a hidden cost that we are not illustrating if we don't actually have a capital budget. And that is what it costs to replace the durable goods that we're using to accomplish that. Fair? So go ahead.
Can I just ask Tim, did you have any capital in your stuff earlier?
So we do, depending on, I don't have a specific capital improvement plan.
That's fine. Well, let it go ahead. I was just curious.
So, I mean, you look at it, you try to figure out what it is, but I'm one of those services, just like Brandon just criticized.
Oh, no.
No, and respectfully.
Well, I'll tell you, when I worked at
respectfully.
Gilpin, we did not have this
Respectfully.
either, yeah.
We're having a hard time funding our day-to-day ops. And let alone planning for the future. And, we don't have a capital budget.
This is the rule, not the exception. Most organizations that I have interacted with don't have this segmented out in their budget at all. And it is, we think to ourselves, there will be some point where we need to replace this thing, and people will realize that it's overwhelmingly necessary, and we'll figure it out. And we're scrappy, and we've always done that. And I mean, with a great reliance on the MTS folks and
And
other.
most of us try to, spread that out. Okay, I know it's useful life is 7 years, but by God, I'm getting 14 years out of that sucker.
Right.
See, and one of the things that complicates this as well now is you used to be able to order an ambulance and get it within at least 180 days.
Totally.
So if you were planning on buying something within 180 days, and now you're finding out that because you can't get chassis, that might be 3 years from now or 4 years from now. When you actually order that ambulance today, what is your financial picture going to look like when you actually get the car? Are you going to be able to afford it?
What's it gonna cost? What's it gonna cost?
I have a single rig that's been on my budget for 3 years now, because.
Yeah.
Who knows when it's gonna show up.
We're gonna get 5 ambulances in 7 months. And the first 2 we ordered in 2020. So in my budget, my capital budget just got obliterated, right? Because I'm gonna spend over $1 million between the end of 2023 and 2024, just on ambulance.
Now you go up.
We're not even keeping up with our replacement plan, right? We can't get enough ambulances to keep up with what we want to do in our depreciated ambulance plan, because of availability, right? So all those things contribute to the idea that when you have an opportunity, you need to be financially prepared to take advantage of it, right? And the problem with grant structures is, as we've all found out in the last couple of years, you may be ready to purchase the ambulance and you may have the grant structure all prepared to do so, and the ambulance might not be available. And we got lucky that the state was willing to sort of be very flexible with the grant programs, but that's not reliable. I mean, it's just not something that we can go to our constituents and say, this is our good plan to keep taking care of it, right? So this capital budgeting is a stakeholder process. And when we do operational budgeting, we certainly have a stakeholder process. At Eagle, we invite all of our staff to contribute to, like Tim pointed out earlier, mattresses. I want to know if we have to replace mattresses. If I spent $200 on mattresses, I wouldn't have a job anymore. I don't know where he's getting these $200 mattresses. They seem terrible. But operational budgeting is certainly a stakeholder process, but we're not inviting our community in. We're not going to our board of directors really with the nuts and bolts of this. We know what it costs annually to operate an ambulance service. We know, the sorts of things that we're gonna have to invest in. The coffee is really important as well. But it's not a stakeholder process in the sense that we're bringing in our partners and people from the community. This capital budgeting is. So when you start thinking about capital budgeting, this is your opportunity to communicate with your community about the true costs of providing services, right? It's an opportunity for you. And so you can go to your, the hospital in your district, you can go to the fire department, whomever you think should be part of this conversation and say, look, these are the investments we're making at 3, 5, and 10 years so that we can maintain service. And this is, our ambulances and our monitors and our new stations and all these sorts of things that we're going to need to continue to reflect the community's need for our services, right?
So what you're saying is our contributors should be building capital reserves.
So inside baseball in Guilford County. Yes, I mean, yes, and we have to sort of, to use you guys as an example, they're an authority, so they have contributions from 3 entities, and the 3 entities, I'm getting a phone call. The 3 entities, have elected to not allow them to have capital reserve or any reserve, and they've said, hey, if you have a problem, we'll come in. And they have deep pockets, so it's an opportunity, but they control the purse strings, and so they control the strategy of developing the organization. And what you want to do is control the strategy of developing the organization in partnership with the people that would contribute, understand it. And so if I'm in Eagle County and Vail Ski Resorts is gonna build 4 more lifts and they're gonna put another 10 hotels in and they're gonna significantly expand their footprint, I need to know that, right? I need to know that for my capital budgeting process. If the city of Eagle, which is now developing probably 5,000 housing units over the course of the next 10 years, if they're going to do that, I need to be at the table so I can understand how that's going to change the investments I make in our organization. And I need to know really specifically how that's going to change impact, because those sorts of investments I have to make today to be prepared to provide the right service in 10 years. So the stakeholders in your communities are incredibly important in this process. This is how you're communicating with me. All right, the financial documents of your organization is how you communicate to the people outside your organization what you need and the sort of services you're providing, and what may come. So these documents that you create, this, we're going to get to this, what is a kind of basic capital plan. But that basic capital plan is something that you can take to your county commissioners and say, look, this is the true cost of the service in 10 years. And this is what it's going to cost for us to get there and maintain it. And oh, and by the way, the choice here is reduction of services or investment. The choice is not, we'll figure out how to do it a little bit better, and we'll have people sleep a little bit less. The choice here is, would you like to invest in our ability to continue to provide the services at this level? Do you want a different level, or are you willing to take a reduction in the level of services we're providing, based on the investment we make? These financial documents allow you to illustrate that, right? So being able to take a well-crafted capital plan to the stakeholders in your community and say, look, we need to change the way we are investing in the system, otherwise we're gonna have a change in our service. How often has anybody in here gone into a stakeholder group and said, if we don't do this, it's gonna change the quality of service we provide? Right? That's an important conversation to have. People need to understand that, we are scrappy, and there's EMS services in this state that do it on volunteers and have ambulances from the early nineties and all those sorts of things. And when we go into communities and sort of assess their ability to have health in their EMS systems, one of the things I always say is, this is your EMS system and it's your opportunity or lack to invest in it. It's your choice. It's your community's choice. If you want to have a Cadillac, best EMS system with gold ambulances, you can certainly do that. You can make that investment, but this is about your community's investment and your ability to make change in your EMS system over time. And it's your choice. And the outside money is helpful, but isn't reliable and certainly might not be there, especially when we think about the context of the financial environment that we're in. If we have a huge recession, I don't know if the state is going to have the money to fund the EMTS program next year. Maybe they will, but maybe they won't. So here's, just so that we can kind of round out this 101, this is that life cycle of a capital asset. And this is what we're sort of talking about. There's a big part of this that is planning and funding, right? We often kind of skip to purchase, use, and then let's figure out how to replace it. But what we need to do is start thinking about the planning and funding part of this equation. And if you look at the private sector, there is no company that is like, let's build a factory. Let's figure out where to get some money. Let's break ground tomorrow. These are long-term, these are 20, 30-year plans. I don't think we're there, but certainly if you're thinking about the station down the street that you built in 1994 that hasn't had any meaningful upgrades, you probably need to build a capital plan to replace it, to significantly improve it. You're not going to be in a place where the building lasts forever. What is your usable life of that building? Is it 30 years? If it's 30 years, then that means at the 30th year, you have depreciated that building to zero value, and now your station is of zero value, right? So you should be ready to replace it, or improve it, or change it, or figure out a way that you can make it sustainable. But as an industry, we're 40-something years old. We're getting to the point where a lot of those investments that were made in the 80s and 90s are ready to be replaced. Have you thought about how to structure the financial situation of your organization to do that? So let's talk misconceptions. So first of all, you do not have to be a CPA or have an MBA to do this, right? These finances generally are not as hard as we think that they are. And we can make them incredibly complex, but the goal of this financial environment is to build simple understanding in people that don't have financial degrees. So you don't need a CPA, you don't need an MBA. You could have help, get a contractor to come in and help you, but this is not something that you need to be able to accomplish this. And this is more of an art than it is a science. One of the big revelations I had when I started studying this stuff was that they just make stuff up. I don't know if you knew this, but a lot of the stuff that's coming out of your financial understanding is estimates. It's good faith estimates. It's how much we're going to spend in diesel next year. I don't know. What do you think diesel's going to cost per gallon? I'm not sure. Let's look into it. Let's see if we can get a little bit of understanding to help support that idea. And then let's make some rough math calculations and come up with something, right? That's how we budget. That's exactly how capital planning works too. We don't know what an ambulance is going to cost in 10 years. I have no idea, right? But I know that the average inflation rate for the last 25 years is 2.2%. And so I'm going to take 2.2% of the current cost of ambulances, and I'm going to assume that the ambulance market's going to do this, but somehow over that course of time, we're going to get to that number. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a bit. You don't have to have money. Let me say that again. You do not have to have money to make a capital plan. In fact, your capital plan is what gets you money, right? So you're not, there's a lot of organizations saying, well, we'd love to have a capital plan, but we barely have any money. So what's the point? We'll figure it out when we get there. Building the capital plan is what you then go out on a roadshow with and tell your community, if we don't do this, we have what? Reduction in services, right? It's not an optional thing. You cannot say, we're going to get to this next year, we'll think about this in 5 years. My hope is that you take this stupid piece of paper that I made and you take it back to your organizations and you start thinking, even if you build a very rudimentary capital plan, you build a capital plan so that you can show the folks that are invested in your organizations And I'm sorry for you, private, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, maybe to figure out a way to sell ice cream outside the ambulance, so I'm not sure. But this is not an optional, for those of us that are government organizations, this isn't something that we can choose to do at a different time. We have to do it now. We have to take the brutal reality to our boards of directors and say, we gotta do this. And then to get to your point, Kim. The EMTS grant program is not a capital plan, okay? We are very fortunate in Colorado that we have a pretty robust investment in a grant program that helps us buy capital. You know, so the majority of us are buying ambulances and monitors and cots and those sorts of things with the EMTS grant. When do you guys think the EMTS grant is gonna sunset? Any ideas? You talked about it? When's the EMTS grant gonna sunset?
Don't know.
Okay.
That depends on how much money has to be appropriated to other things.
Right.
Versus funding grants and what we can do in the future for the HPF to stabilize. I can tell you that fewer and fewer dollars are going to.
So I started my career in New Orleans and worked for the city of New Orleans. And the beautiful thing about the city of New Orleans is that they held things like IV catheters and epinephrine to the same level as like traffic cones. You know, so there was no understanding of what they were gonna buy. And so you'd go to work and we'd have 22 gauge catheters and no C-collars, or all pediatric C-collars, because they chose traffic cones that week, you know? And so we cannot rely upon the state government to prioritize us in their spending. And in fact, they're wrong. They've proven that they're wrong. So your capital program being locked up in their grant funding and whether they allocate funding to that program or not, it's just not, it's not reliable. It's not sustainable. It's not a good idea. How should we be using the EMTS grant program?
To supplement your planning.
We have to buy an ambulance this year, and we've had this capital plan for 7 years, and I have $250,000 in the bank to buy that ambulance. I wrote a grant, and they're gonna pay for half of it. Yippee, my capital fund has $125,000 that I didn't anticipate, right? And I can reduce now my annual investment in the capital fund because there's this wonderful grant program that's gonna help me do that, right? As opposed to, we need an ambulance next year, let's write a grant.
With a waiver.
Yeah, and with the waiver, let's see if we can figure out a way to scrap together the money that it'll take to make the match. And, you know, let's hope we get the grant, let's hope the grant program's funded this year. You know, those are not the kind of sustainable decisions that we should be making as leaders of our organizations. Fair? Sir?
Much of what you were speaking to revolves around agencies who have not only the call volume and the size to make these type of investments, but the funding to do that.
Yeah.
If you have the local county ambulance service running on volunteers.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the crux of this is every one of these systems, all of these public systems, whether that's a volunteer system that takes tax dollars or whether that's us, we all rely upon the investments in our communities. And we have to illustrate the cost, the real cost. I feel like this is a soapbox that Tim stands on all the time. You know, we talk about the cost of transport and we talk about all these other costs that are, we need the real, what is the real cost to have a sustainable organization? And capital is a big part of that. And it's not, the problem, I think, with our general budgeting of capital is it's not a one-year chunk. And so we're not thinking about, we're gonna have this much money in the door this year, we're gonna spend it to provide services, and then next year we'll think about next year. These are 10, 5, 10, 15, 20-year plans. And you really have to understand, what's gonna change in your community so that you can respond to that. This is more a strategic consideration of finance than it is, and that's a big mind shift. Because most of us think about, well, it's January 1st and we're starting our new budget, and what percentage of things have we used this year? And at the end of the year, if I'm under the 100%, then we've done great. But that doesn't account for these sort of multiple financial period costs.
Brandon, if I could just kind of jump in there.
Sure.
I mean, I think this public-private thing is interesting, right? Because I think if you're on the public side of this, you're generally trying to argue your priority against other priorities. And I mean, I think in the county example, Kim brings up, I mean, counties buy things that are expensive. I mean, front end loaders are expensive, snowplows are expensive, trying to figure out how to really communicate up through those large organizations, how this matters. I think on the private side, it's usually a little different conversation. It's like, how can I turn that asset into a revenue producer over what period of time? So if I'm buying that helicopter or that ambulance, it's a little different argument on the revenue side.
Totally.
But yeah.
Then we're diving into net present value and we're doing all that sort of, for-profit calculation stuff. That those of us on the public side just don't need to know that, really. That he left, so he recognizes it. I mean, so.
Well, even when I think about it, some of that's synonymous as well. Synonymous from the government sector, we call it a surplus. Because if you don't have a margin, you don't have a mission. We
Sure.
call it a revenue surplus. In the private sector, they may call it a profit.
But the difference is that they cannot control their profit in the same way that we can control our surplus. And our surplus is beholden to our community's understanding of need to provide service. He has to do net present value. He has to look at I'm gonna buy 3 ambulances in 2025, and I'm gonna add these service lines because I'm gonna have those ambulances. And what is the revenue generated by those 3 ambulances? And does that revenue equate to enough profit over cost in that usable life of those items to make it worth it, right? So that's that whole net present value calculation. And that's us in the for-profit sector, like looking forward and saying, I want to grow my business in this way. Maybe the easy way to understand it is, instead of buying a diesel ambulance next year, I'm going to buy a gas ambulance. And that's going to save me this amount of money per year. And that amount of money per year is going to offset the cost of that increase in the gas ambulance versus the diesel. So, you know what I mean? Those sorts of ideas. So when you Google capital budgeting, you're going to see a whole bunch of for-profit stuff that talks about these sort of long-term investments and how they repay the original capital. For us, it's a little different because we can go to a community of people and say, we have a really efficient, really high functioning organization. This is what we need over time to be able to maintain that service. And hopefully, do things like put a sales tax or raise a mill levy or have some, collaborative effort between law enforcement and fire and us to build a station and figure out ways to sort of chart the course for our organizations. If I had started this and everybody in the room raised their hand and said they were from a private, I would have just left. Because
You speak private just fine.
Huh?
I think you speak private just fine.
At the end of the day, this is kind of a deviation. At the end of the day, I don't know how they survive. I really don't. It's very difficult. It requires a scale and efficiency that I don't think we see in the public sector. It's really tough. We're talking about private.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Who do you work for?
Legacy EMS.
Where's that?
We have operations here in Colorado, the DoD bases,
Okay.
some IFTs,
Okay.
in Virginia to Alaska.
Wow.
We
Okay.
are starting Louisiana.
Oh, no. Me
100
too.
Med Express.
Huh?
100 Med Express.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. How many calls do you guys run a year nationwide?
Oh, nationwide. Probably, I couldn't tell you nationwide because I don't know. For Colorado, we're right around 5,000 to 6,000.
But do you over 50,000 nationwide, do you think?
No.
No, so you're pretty small for a coast to coast. Okay. I think the way the privates are successful is scale. So, AMR can buy an ambulance for 30% less than we can because they're going to buy 100 of them, right? And so all their cost structures are completely different. We should get this guy off the screen. So what I want to do, and we got about half an hour left. What I want to do is we're going to do a capital plan. What do you guys think? So yeah, that'd be great. So I'm gonna give you this worksheet, and you're gonna see on one side is this capital planning got it needed. I like baseball. So what I want you to do, and this, if you are in an organization where you make these decisions, think about your organization. If you're not, you need to think about your house and cars and the sorts of investments you make. But what we need to do here is we need to get a good baseline of the things that we own that are capital resources, that are capital assets. And then we need to build a plan to replace them. You guys on board for that? Yeah. I'm gonna give you 10 minutes. Got it. Is any equipment, stations, things that you have now that you will need to replace? And need it is the stuff that you're gonna either have to build, buy, or repair. And when we talk about capital investment, this isn't just, I'm gonna buy a new station. This is my station needs a new roof. It needs durable repair, right? So not what it costs to clean the station, but what it costs to replace a bathroom in the station, or what it costs to renovate the garages, or the sorts of things that you're gonna need to make investments for that station to be able to continue to function.
You've got about 15 people online too.
Yeah, and you
Give them
people
some
online.
guidance.
I would give you a piece of paper, but I don't know where you are. But you can, this is simple. You can just pull out a sheet of scrap paper and you could do the same exact exercise. So I want to see the stuff that you have and it's replacement. And when we talk about replacement, what's the usable life of your ambulance, right? So if I'm in Denver and I'm thinking about the Denver paramedics, the usable life of a Denver paramedics ambulance is probably a couple of months. At this point, no, it's probably like, I don't know what they do, but it's probably 3 to 5 years, right? So they're running, 3,000-4,000 calls a year per ambulance. And so those ambulances probably wear out pretty quickly. If you're at, a volunteer ambulance service on the Eastern Plains that runs, 60 calls a year, they have, when we were in, Yuma County, there was Joe's, is that what it's called? Yeah. Joe's EMS, and they had a 1994 ambulance that had 33,000 miles on it. This is like 2-3 years ago. So your usable life may be different depending on how you use things. I would suggest a 1994 ambulance probably is past its usable life, but you guys know about depreciation schedules? So if you think about it in a really simple way, the depreciation schedule is the usable life, right? When that thing reaches zero value, it's time for it to be replaced. So what's the usable life of your ambulance? So if you're talking about replacing your ambulance 203, I'm guessing you bought that ambulance in 2016, right? Probably about 10 years. If you're at an agency that runs more calls, maybe it's less. If you're at an agency that runs less calls, maybe it's more. So 10 minutes. I want to go through this. Make yourself a little bit of a list, and we'll come back together and talk about it. Would you like a capital plan sheet?
No, I got one.
Okay.
I'll take the one I have on my.
Oh, you don't have one? I'm sorry.
I'll just use the one I have on my screen.
Thank you.
Right, looks like everybody's got some stuff down. So, let me, I'll give you this other hint. So another university other hint. If you're teaching something and you make people do work during the program, you have to do less work. And so, I see good lists. I see everybody has, some stuff jotted down. So what are we gonna do with, like, what does this matter? So great, I got, now you have a plan for the things you wanna replace and the things you might wanna buy, right? Is this a good start? Who in this room has written this list down in the past? Good, so this is about half of us have considered this before, but what have you done with it? Okay, did you tell them it was gonna cost to achieve making those purchases?
My estimates, yeah.
Okay, great, so that's what we're after, so if you flip the sheet over, you're gonna see this. Ooh, there's another side to the sheet, you guys didn't know. So now, what we're trying to do here, this is our end goal. Our end goal is, what amount of money do I need to put aside in my budget annually to achieve my capital goals, right? So at the end, you're gonna see this thing that says annual funding commitment, right? This is what I have to invest in my capital fund in order to achieve the goals of purchasing these things I've identified in the years that I have identified them. So this is where this kind of gets a little bit more complex. So I've got ambulance 203, same thing I had back here, right? I got my ambulance 203. I want to buy that ambulance in 2 years, right? The usable life of that ambulance is 10. I'm maybe 7, 8 years into the ambulance it's going to replace, and I know I need to buy it. So let's say I'm going to buy that in my 2025 budget cycle, and I'm going to need $260,000 to buy that. And how do I get that number? Well, I know today if I bought that ambulance, it'd be $250,000. And I'm gonna estimate, and this is up to you. This is the part where this gets a little bit squirrely. I'm gonna estimate my rate of inflation for the cost of that ambulance at 0.02 or 2%, and I have 2 years. So I'm gonna calculate. Oh, I said there wasn't any math, but I lied. All right, there's math. I'm sorry. I'm gonna calculate that cost relative to the inflation rate. Now, this is the formula, okay, but you don't have to really worry about that because guess what? Excel does this for you. Google Sheets does this for you. All you have to do is enter in the current amount and then put in the percentage of interest growth over time. And then you just pull that box out for as many years as you want to see it, and it'll give you this number. So you can do a easily Google tutorial on Excel, and it will tell you how to achieve this number. So it's not the end of the world. But what I want to do is figure out, gosh, what is that future cost? What do I need to spend in the year that I want to replace it to be able to achieve replacement? And then I take that future cost, I divide it about by the number of years that I have left before I purchase it, And that's my annual funding commitment, right? So if you take this sheet that I gave you and you spell a few of these things out, you're gonna start coming up with numbers in this last column. The numbers in that last column will sum to the total capital commitment in whatever period of time, right? So if you go out to 2030 in this plan, that bottom line number is gonna be the total capital expense between now and 2030, right? Which is a great number to have. You're gonna know I need to spend $3.5 million between now and 2030 to accomplish all these goals. The number you need is what that investment would take annually. And you're gonna have to get into this and do a little bit of math. You're gonna have to figure out, okay, 2023, 2024, 2025, I'm preparing to buy this thing, and those are gonna drop down into those budgets, and so on and so forth. So the station you're gonna build in 2035, that you're gonna fund over the course of the next 12 years, it's gonna have a percentage for each year. So you're gonna build all this, and on the bottom line of your Excel spreadsheet, you're gonna see the most important number, which is the investment that you need to make in capital annually to achieve this plan. Why is that number so important?
That's what you take to your.
That's what you gotta ask for. That's the amount of money that should be in your operational, annual expenditure, over and above what it actually costs you to provide services.
This is my ignorance of economics. Where do you get your rate of inflation from?
Let me make it up.
Okay.
This is where the art part of it comes in. So if I had built a capital plan in 2016, it would have gotten completely exploded in 2020, 2021, right? Because we saw precipitous rate of inflation. But if you look back over the courses of really long time, you can figure out, I think I'm going to be 2 to 3%. You could be really conservative and say it's going to be 4%. You could be really lean and say we're going to put it in at 1.75%. We're going to rely on grants through this period, and so that should make us whole. What you need to do is make good faith estimates, and then you need to tell people why you made these decisions, right?
Get an average over time.
Yeah, well, you could, yeah. So I wouldn't try to pick different inflation rates, but I would say, I think in this period of time, and you could do it for different things too. So you could say, I think ambulances are going to increase 2%. I think building supplies are going to increase at 1.5%. I've looked back at what glide scopes have gone from their inception to today. I think they're going to get cheaper. So I'm actually going to build in negative 0.1% based on technology getting cheaper, maybe. So this is where you sit down and you actually build your good faith estimates. And then the thing that's really, really important is you have to illustrate those. So you have to say, here's what I think is going to happen. And this is why I've made these decisions. So people can look at the decision making and your board can say, I don't think you're right about this particular change. I think it should be here. And then you can make that adjustment. And at the end of the day, when you get 5 years out, you look back at the sort of thoughts that you had and you continue to adjust them. This is all in pencil.
Probably way off.
Yeah, totally.
Is it worth adjusting yearly when we have great big shifts like we've had over the past couple of years?
So, what you should be doing right now, if you have a capital plan in the last couple of years, is going back to it and saying, all of our estimates are now wrong. The ambulance that I thought would cost, $175,000 in 2023 actually cost $250. And so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to adjust things. The potential there is that big change will probably get worked out in a long period of time. So if you're talking about 30-year building costs, replacing your station in 2050, that's probably less important for this sort of stuff, because if you look at the stock market, everything grows in a relatively predictable rate over long periods of time, and that's why dollar cost averaging is better than playing the market, because the market doesn't work in the way that people think it does.
So on your other side, you had 6 monitors that you apparently purchased all in 1 year.
Sure.
What's the value? Because there's multiple aspects to this. You want to have consistent equipment, but 6 of them in 1 year, that's $300,000, right? Could you have not divided those out 2 a year, but now you've maybe got 2 life packs and a Zoll and different.
Right. This is the part where this is where the operational sort of insight comes in, and stakeholder, and get your salespeople involved in these sorts of plans, everybody that could provide you some information. I mean, when we think about stuff like replacing the roof on your station, right? I don't know. I'm going to have to bring in an expert that understands roof replacement and, you know, capital planning for building maintenance and all those sorts of things. So you need a group of folks that have understanding to build good estimates. But you can do this with shitty estimates. I mean, you totally get something is better than nothing. But the highest evolution of this is, you know, I hire a person that is a construction expert to come in and build me a capital plan for renovation and repair and replacement of stations, right? And I'll pay $20,000 and that person will come in and they'll look at all my stations and they'll go and jump on the roof or whatever they do, and they'll figure out what needs to change over the course of time. That's where you'd love to, if we had the money to do that sort of stuff, that's where we'd love to be. But, you know, I'm gonna replace 6 monitors and I'm trying to balance, you know, do I wanna replace 2 at a time and have to train people on different monitor setups and how things work and have complexity of the system? Or do I wanna plan for the 6 monitors 10 years ago and just know, we're gonna buy 6 monitors, we're gonna place all of our monitors at one time, it's one training, we won't have different monitors in the system, and so, you know, I reduce that cognitive load that the paramedics have to carry to understand how to use all the monitors. That makes sense?
You can get a grant to pay for that.
And maybe you can get a grant to pay for that. But, you know, as we talked about earlier, the EMTS grant program is not a capital fund. I just want to point that out. Again.
You're looking at 5 monitors.
Yeah, and you know,
6 of them with a grant.
yes, the grant programs are awesome. I'm not, you know, like, I'm not disparaging the grant programs. We're very fortunate to have access to that stuff. And you should use that as much as you can. It's just not reliable in the sense that it's something that in 20 years you can say, I'm going to be able to use a mineral grant to replace that station. It's just not it's not something that you can actually rely upon. So we're not going to do this right now because this is going to be more challenging. What I want you to do, your homework, and I'm going to call you next week and check on you, is to sit down and you can, this is the easiest way to do this is to build this thing in Excel. But sit down and for the stuff that you wrote down on the first page, start building an understanding. Start building an understanding of the costs associated and what it would take to actually replace those items. Okay. This is your steps into building this capital understanding. And then once you have that bottom line annual funding commitment, that's what you take to your community and say, look, these are the things we're going to need in the next 20 years to continue to provide services. These are the durable goods. And this is what they're going to cost annually for us. We need to make this investment now. I'm doing this because I don't want to come back to you in 5 years and ask you for a bond or ask you for, you know, an increase in my mill. I want to do that today to set us up for success long term. Fair? Any questions about the math associated with doing this? I'm not making you calculate net present value. That is the biggest pain in the ass. But this is really simple. I mean, all we're doing here is we're looking at the you know, cost of the item. We're looking at the average interest, and we're multiplying. What is it called when you do that? Yeah. By the number of years. So it's taking it to the number of years power, and then that's going to give you that, you know, easy understanding of how this $55,000 turns into $60,724 in 5 years. That's all that is, and Excel does it for you. So let's talk about funding sources as we round this out. The private guy left, so we don't have to talk about loans. We can't do that. So what I'm advocating for here is saving up money for it. That's what I'm advocating for. I mean, just like anything else, it is cheaper if you have a capital account that you are investing annually. You're making money off your money until the day that you need to pull the money out of that investment and purchase something. That is the absolute best way to do this. Now you say, we don't have enough money to make up the actual operating costs of our organization. How the hell are we going to save money to buy these big capital purchase investments? And that's a great question. You know, this is where having something like this and being able to communicate with constituents it becomes valuable. But that's really hard. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to save up to buy big capital, especially when you're talking about $5 million stations, right? Most of us can't pay cash for those things. Loans is a fine structure. You know, most of us in our private lives use loans to make capital purchases, your cars, your home, you know, sort of the big investments that you're making in your life. What's the downside of a loan? You got to pay more money for it, right? So you're paying for the privilege of purchasing the thing. And when you're in low interest rate markets like we were 4 or 5 years ago, you know, when you're paying 2 3/4 for a loan, that's great. That's a great structure. I'm paying almost nothing for the privilege of taking the money out, but who has a credit card that has a balance on it? You don't have to raise your hand. So, you recognize that the balance of your credit card, you're paying 20% of that balance for the privilege of having that balance, right? So it's great that you get to extend purchasing beyond the cash that you have in your bank, but you're paying 20% of the cost of that extension annually for the privilege, okay? So recognize that it's not the best structure from a long-term financial strategy, and neither is the loan structure if you can avoid it. Now, for most of the public entities, we aren't allowed, we are not allowed to enter into a loan that lasts more than a year. We can do something called a TAN loan, right? Which allows us to take a loan against our taxable over the course of 1 year, but we have to repay it before the end of the year. That's really the only loan that we can engage in. We'll talk about lease purchase, which is a trick of the eye. But you know, loans could be a great way to do this if you're a private entity. Certainly, it becomes really difficult if you're public. What about bonds? How do bonds work? You may have done a bond initiative recently. So it's a loan from your community, essentially, right? You say, give us this amount of money over time with a percentage of interest, and we will be able to purchase this item. So, you know, you're essentially, anytime you're in the bond market, you're saying, I'm gonna give you this, and my return is gonna be this fixed rate, and over time, I'm gonna get money on the front end to make an investment, right? And so bond initiatives for communities are something that is inside of the realm of capital purchasing. Typically, you see these not for ambulances, but for things like stations, bigger ticket purchasing. We talked about the grant structure. The grant structure is not bad. I'm not here to tell you the grant structure is bad. Who has a professional grant writer that works for them? Anybody? You guys, are you the professional grant writer? Right? So how much effort do you put into writing grants?
Stupid.
Yeah. How much of your job do you think? You gave me an FTE of writing grants. 15 to 20%. So I'm not gonna ask you your salary, but think about this. Your total compensation package, you're spending 20% of your total compensation package annually on writing grants. Do you get a rate of return on that? That's worthwhile. Okay. So grants are great, right? And if you have a professional grant writer and you can crank out grants all the time, that's awesome. But go ahead.
That's the piece that, you know, isn't even factored into it, right? Like I can crank out grants all day, I have no problem with that.
Right.
But then when you factor in what it takes to manage those grants beyond that.
Right.
Now I'm losing money.
So, I mean, there's a concept in economics called opportunity cost. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but your opportunity cost essentially is the money you trade in to do whatever you're doing, right? So, for example, if you buy a fixer-upper house and you're like, I'm gonna fix this house up, and you can make $35 an hour as a paramedic, right? And you could get somebody to come in and fix your house up for $25 an hour. You're losing $10 an hour to fix up your house. That's your opportunity cost, right? Now, maybe you get a lot of satisfaction out of your fixing up your house, and that's fine. But when you're thinking about the investments you're making in your organizations, always think about what else could you be doing, or would it be a more efficient allocation of your time? Not to say that grants are bad, but you know, you often see a low return on really going out into the world, especially when you're thinking about federal firefighter grants and all that sort of stuff. Except for you, the rest of us can't get free fire or not. No. Oh, I thought you were. Oh no, you're not. Okay, sorry to miscategorize you. You know, we don't often see very much success with that. So I would suggest when you're thinking about grant funding, pick the grants that have high success rates, that you know how to write. I mean, the MTS, the CREATE grants, the things that we have that we know are, sure thing is the wrong word, but we know we can have a high rate of success. Concentrate your efforts there. But be conscious of how much time you're spending writing grants and what the actual rate of return is on that time. How about taxation? Right? Just make the taxpayer pay for it. Right? Go back and say, hey, we got to increase your mill levy because we got to be able to do this stuff. What do you need to be able to illustrate that argument?
Data.
What's your capital plan? You got to go to your taxpayers and say, hey, we crunched the numbers, we did the math. This is our 20-year plan, and this is what we need annually to invest in this plan to be able to have the systems, equipment, and facilities to serve this community as it changes over time. Right? And you go back to them and say, if we do this now, we'll never come back to you for another time. Don't ever say that. there's an opportunity there, right? If you have a really well thought out, really well put together capital plan, you can go to your board of directors and your community stakeholders and say, look, this is the structure that we want to move towards. We think this is going to set us up for 20 years in a financially sustainable way. Lease purchase. Who said lease purchase? So you tell us about lease purchase.
You're the professional.
You said that out loud, though. These are the rules of the classroom.
Yeah. Basically, a loan, just a, like you said, a trick of the eye. It's you buy something on a 5-year lease, and at the end of the year, you can hand it back if you don't want it. If it doesn't get approved for next year.
So the way that they are able to skirt the rules is they say, you don't really own this, we own this, we're letting you have it, and at the end of this period, you have an option to buy it, right? And the option to buy it essentially is at the end of the lease purchase, you maintain ownership. Upsides. Yeah, it spreads out your investment over time. It certainly, it allows public entities to essentially take a loan. It can be a fine structure by stations and ambulances and fire trucks, and we see people, this is the structure that public governments typically use to do this if they're not gonna do a bond initiative or they're not gonna ask for more taxation. What's the downside?
It's more expensive.
Yeah, it's more expensive. They have significantly higher interest rates than even a traditional loan, right? Because anytime when you're thinking about financial stuff, anytime that you have more flexibility, you're gonna pay for it, right? Anytime you're a credit risk, you're gonna pay for it. Anytime there's any sort of challenge on the side of the person that's loaning or the person that's giving you the device, you're gonna pay for it on the back end because they don't want to have risk. This is all about risk mitigation. And so if I walk in with a check and say, I'll take that ambulance, please, I might get a cash discount, right? Because there's such a small amount of complexity for the seller. If I walk in and say I want to do a lease purchase, the most complex structure, they're gonna charge me for it. So long term, is it the best strategy? If you need an ambulance tomorrow and all you have is, if you could defer payment, some of them are deferred payment structures. So I can buy an ambulance today, I don't have to make a payment until next year. And then I have 5 years to make payments and I need the ambulance now. Maybe it's okay. But if we're talking about long-term capital planning and strategy, not the best structure. How about bake sale? Anybody do bake sale? No?
A lot of fire departments do, volunteers.
A lot of volunteer departments do. So the pancake, I used to work for Golden Fire. The pancake breakfast at Golden Fire made like $15,000 in profit every year, right? It was unbelievable. You had these, it was like from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock in the morning. It was just they served like 3,000 people a year pancakes, right? So, I put it up there in jest, but certainly there's an opportunity there. But I think more importantly, what about charitable giving? Have you guys thought about the organizations that exist in your communities that would be willing to give money, right? Are there organizations in your community, the Lions Club and this and all these different people that have pots of money? And maybe it's not $250,000 to buy an ambulance, but maybe it's $25,000. Maybe it's $10,000, right? So we can move in a direction that's going to give us a little bit more cash.
Can I say something on that, Brandon?
Yeah.
Only because it was an epiphany for me. We're funding a new station, 50% to the tune of charitable giving, which if you would ask me 2 or 3 years ago, I said there's no way. Why would anyone give to a public entity? But we have to the tune of $5 million now from certain demographics in our community out of Gunnison, and it blew my mind. But we also spent money. We spent $100,000 on a group to come in to professionally help us organize. So you got to pay money to get money, and that was a valuable lesson for me personally.
It's something that we don't often think about, but certainly we need to move in a direction of being creative with funding. And there's if you've ever heard of the zero-sum game, there's a concept that there's sort of fixed value, and that if you and I are splitting a pie, I get 40%, you get 60%, and there's no way for us to get more. I have to lose for you to win, right? But the reality of it is that's not the way the world actually works. The world works in the ability to grow value, and so collaboration and partnership is how we grow value. So maybe there's a charitable giving opportunity, maybe there's a collaboration with a builder opportunity, maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate with the fire department in your district, or the police department in your district, the public works department in your district, and reduce the cost of building a new station. There's all these sort of structures where if we have, and this sort of gets down to the end of it, if we have the planning documents and we actually have a real understanding of what it's gonna cost us to function, then we can take that out on the road and talk to our constituents and talk to our partners. We can actually get to a place where we reduce our costs overall. And we collaborate and we partner and maybe we have an opportunity to build at scale with a city, or maybe we have the opportunity to have, a charitable organization that's gonna see some value in donating money. But there's all kinds of creative structures that we can use, and we have to start thinking about, how we can move out into our communities and talk about what we need. But in order to do that, you have to have these baseline documents. You have to be able to go out and say, look, this is our bottom line cost. This is what it costs us to provide services. And this is what it costs us to make investments over time to maintain those services or to grow with the community. Any questions, thoughts, discussion? Sir?
So there's a significant amount of growth happening, new construction, things like that. Are you able to leverage that growth and by putting money into your capital, from the builders, from the whatever?
Yeah, you can do, there's structures like impact fee structures. If you ever go to a new construction neighborhood and you see the fire station, it looks just like all the other houses, that's because the builder built the fire station. And so maybe they had some obligation to do that because there was an impact fee structure. So you can, when they come in and say, we're gonna build 5,000 units, you can say, okay, the city can say, okay, as a condition of doing that, you have to build this infrastructure, these roads, a fire station, an ambulance station, you buy a fire truck, all those things exist. But that has to be stuff that exists prior to. So, impact fee structure has to exist before the builder ever walks in the door of the county to say, I want to build this.
So you as the political entity have to have already put this into your.
You have to go to your constituent cities and county and say, we would like to establish this
an
offset.
impact fee.
Yeah, this offset cost. So, and what Sean was talking about earlier is, when I said your name and you just appeared. When I come into a community and buy a house, I'm benefiting from the investments of the people that have lived there for a long time. And so if a neighborhood's built and I come into Crested Butte and now all of a sudden I get the full faith and glory of the Crested Butte Fire Protection, is it Fire Protection District? No.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
The faith and glory part was good also.
Oh, yeah. Then, I'm getting that for free, essentially. I mean, I'm buying a house that's expensive, but I'm getting all that for free. And maybe if they have to add stuff to service me, then I'm getting that for free too. So why not? I have some stake in the game. I built my house. The builder that built my house has to build a fire station or has to buy a fire truck or whatever.
There's some long-term ramifications politically to that particular discussion, especially in our zone communities, right? Affordable housing thing.
Yeah.
And every impact fee, if I went to my commissioners and I said, they're building 6,000 homes in Granby Ranch over the next 7 years, and they need to build the EMS station. They're gonna be like, yeah, no, because some of those houses have to be affordable, and that's gonna be part of your metro district fee.
Yeah.
And that defeats the purpose.
Belly up to the bar of all the people that are asking for concessions for builders. And I mean, then when you look at the private sector side of this, the builder is doing this to make money. And so if you eat away at all their margin, eventually they're gonna say, you know what, this isn't worth it. So this is where having your ducks in a row and being in the conversations prior to any of this stuff happening is so important.
Any questions online? For Brandon, I don't see any hands raised.
That's me. Email, text. Thanks for your attention. It was great. And hopefully you'll go forth and make some capital plans.
Very good. Thank you, Brandon. So we are right at break. We will break from 10:50 to 11:05. Come back at 11:05 for Dave Hancher.
Will Dave be live or?
Dave will be right up here. Either the lady that he's gonna have to drive really fast. He's somewhere in Vegas, I think. I don't like He did not. How do I get him to go away?